Okay, so everything is being recorded once again because of your friends who are quarantining still. Today we move further, we enter the realm of the theory of production. From now on we will be studying much more what producers do, firms, entrepreneurs, profit maximization, optimization of production, and so on. The theory of the firm, what is the firm, how it functions, and so on. So theory of production from now on. Thus far, we mostly dealt with what consumers do, how they make decisions, the forces of supply and demand, marginal utility, and so on. We try to base the entire analysis on individual preferences and individual value scales. You will see that eventually, when all is said and done, that even the theory of production could be reduced, and it's reduced to individual preferences and scarcity. This week and a part of the next week, we will be dealing with a part of the theory of production which is called theory of competition. Theory of competition. What is competition? How it works? What kind of models can be used to understand competition among different firms? And so on and so forth. So we will begin today. We will not have a class on Wednesday. So today, on Friday and Monday, we will be dealing with competition, maybe a part of the next Wednesday's class. So today we begin this story about market competition and what is it, how it works, and so on. As any other complex theoretical problem, you can use, and we do use always different models to think about it. And when it comes to competition, there are two basic ways, actually, two basic concepts, two basic approaches to competition that we want to study. One is what we can call static competition. A static competition means we do the analysis starting from the conditions within which the market competition happens are not changing. The conditions are static. What does that mean? It means that large technological environment within which firms operate is given. We don't assume the innovation to exist. The production techniques are considered to be constant. That the firms compete. We try to look at how firms can compete even if the conditions within which they compete do not change. You will see there are two different models that we, model 1 and model 2, that analyzes this. What we're going to be doing most of the time today is this first model of static competition today. So how firms adjust prices and quantities that they sell if we forbid them, if we prohibit them by the assumptions of analysis to innovate, to change products, and so on. So that's a static competition, is a competition within a given context. And the second, kind of more interesting and more, let's say, more realistic view of competition that we will read about next week is dynamic competition. That means what happens once you allow everything to change, when you approach the real state of affairs. Dynamic competition, sometimes it is called, for example, in a reading that you will read next week, it's called creative destruction. Innovation creates all kinds of changes within the economic system that create new and good things. Creative destruction, kind of paradoxical catchphrase that says, yes, we create new products and new forms of business organizations. So we don't just compete with lower prices and higher quantity produced within a given environment. We change environment all the time. Entrepreneurs all the time change the environment by revolutionizing the products that they make, by revolutionizing sometimes the way how they produce it, the internal business organization of the firms, and many other ways, many other things. And by creating new things, they destroy or make obsolete the old forms of business organization. They destroy or make obsolete the products that used to exist before, and so on. So personal computer, all but destroy the typewriter industry, car industry made, or railroad made, a horse and buggy industry obsolete, and so on. So that's a concept of dynamic competition that takes into account change and revolutions that are ongoing in the economic system all the time. So today we'll begin with a simpler model in which we are gonna assume that there are no great many changes going on in the technological equipment or the technological setup of the economy, and then see what ways firms do have to compete under such conditions. And the simplest possible model for that is the so-called model called variously as a price taker model. Price taker model, or sometimes also called perfectly competitive equilibrium, or perfect model of perfect competition. So this is a model, a note of warning at the very beginning for all of you. So by now you understand very well that the model is not a realistic description of the real world. A model is a useful simplification. A model simplifies things intentionally in order to concentrate on one isolated or set of isolated problems in order to better understand. So here I will explain first what are the characteristics of this model, how it works, what are the consequences, and eventually at the end I will tell you why do we use this seemingly very unrealistic, crazy model, what is its purpose, why did we bother developing it and thinking about it, what is the net value, what is the value added for our understanding of the market economy, why economists actually develop this model. So we'll start first with, we'll jump in right into it and try to understand its characteristics. And as we do so, you will finally realize what is the purpose, what is the value of this model. So this model here, price taker model, I'll explain in a second why price taker and why perfect competition, don't worry. And this second model that we will analyze on Friday, they analyze the market by concentrating on by starting from one key parameter, and that's the position of the demand curve. Demand curve that facing an individual firm. What kind of demand an individual firm within this model faces, and what can we learn about the process of competition by looking into it. We'll start first with the preconditions. What is the essence of the model? What are the limitations? What are those simplifications of the model of competition that we take into account here? The first of competition is that the first axiom of this model that corresponds to our intuition in a certain sense about what competition should be is that there is a large number of firms. Large number of firms. Ideally infinite number. The very large number. Oh, there is something wrong with the camera. You can say that the best approximations of this perfectly competitive model in this regard, the existence of a very large number of firms, would be a stock market or some agricultural markets. Markets in which there is a huge number of buyers and sellers trading all the time. The stock market, agricultural markets. So not all really existing markets approximate or satisfy this precondition. So in order for a market to be competitive, you need a large number of firms. The second precondition is no barriers to entry. So what are barriers to entry? Can anyone jump in here? Barrier to entry into the business. Can you give me some examples of a barrier to entry? Yes, so it could be barriers to entry imposed by the government. So these are legal barriers.
It would be a natural barrier by nature of the size of the other firms. So
Mhm.
you can't just start a car company because there's so many big car companies. It's just be too much to come.
This is startup costs or financial barriers to entry. So one classic example here. So you will see that this model cannot be the whole story about competition when you look aviation, plane, aircraft industry. You have 2 or 3 firms existing in the market. It's not a large number of firms, and you know what are the startup costs if you want to compete against Airbus or Boeing. That's billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that you have to accumulate and invest. So you and me now cannot just decide, let's jump in and compete against Boeing. Whereas it's much easier to compete against wherever, to open up a bakery in Bismarck downtown. That's the financial barriers to entry into that business are much lower. So lower the financial barriers to entry, more competitive the market is. And legal barriers could be eliminated by simply government staying away from regulating the business in such a way as to make the costs of entry higher. So regulations could be barriers to entry. If you have to satisfy a regulatory requirement to use a certain type of production process or equipment which is extremely expensive, that's a barrier to entry, because you have to pay money in advance to install this fancy equipment, which increases your costs of entry. So that's a low financial and legal costs of entry are precondition of competitiveness. Another firm is perfect information. Perfect information does not mean that we are omniscient and that we know everything that needs to be known. It means only that if there are opportunities for trade, we will know about it. So market participants are well informed about the available opportunities for trade. There are sellers of a certain good, and buyers will know about them, and vice versa. That means that there are no informational barriers to trade, to exchange. So if you don't have this if you don't have well-informed participants in the market, then it's not competitive. Now, one of the key propositions here, that individual firm takes the price of its product as a given variable. So price is given to a firm participating in this market, which means that the firm has to take the price of its product as a given variable. It cannot influence the price of its product in any shape or form. If it tries to do so, it will lose money. So that's the reason why we call the model the price taker model. You cannot influence the price. The reason, what do you think? What is the reason for that in this perfectly competitive model, you cannot influence the price?
Because of the large number of firms.
A large number of firms. And then you're in, the size of any one individual firm is so small that whatever you do will not affect them. We'll come back to that. So price is given to a firm and it cannot change it, it cannot influence. Another condition is that a condition of homogeneous product, which means that everybody is selling the same product. Because this model wants to analyze competition when it comes to prices and quantities, how firms can compete by doing or not doing something with their prices of their products and with quantities that they can increase, quantities produced, increase or decrease. We want to eliminate these complications that can come about if we allow for differentiation of products. So no differentiation. Everybody is selling the exact same car, the exact same suit, the exact same chocolate cake. Because what's going to happen if we allow differentiation of products? Then you can compete with higher quality. And that complicates our analysis of what prices and quantities do. Since we want to make it ceteris paribus, all other things being equal. We want to eliminate the influence of irrelevant considerations for the problem at hand that we want to analyze. So it's not that we claim that people don't compete by differentiating products. It's not that we really think that everybody is going to be selling all the time the same chocolate cakes and same cars, but we want to eliminate the effects of that for our analysis. What we are really after here, that's a correspondence between price and quantity produced by an individual firm. So they're selling the same product. Now you'll see there are different versions of the list that I'm just writing down for you, because some of them are redundant. Some of them follow from the previous one. So, for example, this one condition that I'm just going to tell you about follows from another condition is no advertising. A chance to get a good participation rate. From which of the previous 5 ones this no advertising follows pretty much directly. And why?
Perfect information.
In which sense? How perfect information implies no advertising or requires no advertising? Why firms do advertising?
Well, to show that they're better or
Yeah. But primarily to show the people that their product exists, to overcome the information barrier. If we assume that there are no information barrier in the economic system, the main reason for advertising disappears. No advertising. One more, the 7th one, a very important one, not to be missed. All economy is in the system of private property rights, private ownership of the means of production. Which means factories, real estate, machines, everything that is used in the production process is privately owned. Private ownership of the means of production. Machines, tools, equipment, office space, and so on. Everything but one factory is not privately owned by somebody else. Human labor. But you can say that even human labor is privately owned by people who work for wages, because what you do, you sell your services to your employers. So even human labor in a certain sense is privately owned. Call that self-ownership. Okay, so these are the preconditions for this model. How the model works then? Let us go back to one basic distinction that we've drawn before. These two are the two demand curves. Facing an individual firm in two different markets. Which of these two markets is more likely to be competitive? In which an individual firm is facing a more horizontal demand curve, or the one in which it faces a more vertical demand curve? Horizontal, why?
Range changes, there's still people going to be selling, I guess, around the same price.
Yeah, the answer is correct, but your explanation is not quite precise. Why is this market more likely to be competitive? It has to do with one technical concept that you did for the homework previous week. Concept begins in elasticity of demand. So what is elasticity? Remember?
It's because if you raise the price even just a little bit, it's going to greatly decrease your demand.
Yeah, it's going to increase demand for your product and the quantity that you sell. So elastic demand curve is more horizontal. That means for a small change in price will lead to big changes in quantity sold in the market. So then it's not a very smart strategy if you're facing the demand curve like this. It's not a very smart strategy to try and increase price and to bump up your revenue that way. Whereas in this situation, you can get away with increasing price significantly. Let's say from here to here, you're going to lose a little bit, but you're going to earn a way more on account of a higher price per unit. So in general, this is just a reminder that the more horizontal the demand curve, more elastic the demand is, and hence more competitive market conditions are. In this particular case, the demand curve facing an individual firm is usually described as completely horizontal, parallel with the horizontal axis. This is the demand curve. This is the equilibrium price. This is perfectly competitive or price taker market, price taker firm. The key characteristic is the price taking characteristic, which means that you cannot influence the price in any way. That means that you cannot either increase or decrease your price. Whatever you do, you're going to be losing money. So why is that the case? So you can intuitively accept, okay, if they increase price, there is a lot of competition and buyers will switch over to other sellers and you would be losing revenue because fewer people would be buying from you because you have higher price. Okay, that makes sense. In a perfectly competitive market, you have to refrain from increasing price. Now the claim here is even more radical. You cannot either decrease price. Even if you try to cut price, you're going to be losing money. Why is that so? What do you think? If you decrease your price, you're going to be losing money as well. You're going to go bankrupt very quickly. This is a subtle point. This is a more difficult one to spot than the previous one, which is fairly obvious. Think about the characteristics of the market. Very large, huge number of firms, thousands and millions of firms. So the individual size of any one firm is infinitesimally small, extremely small. So then, imagine stock market, for example. Imagine that you're in the stock market and everybody is selling something and you stop buying. Is it very likely in your size the amount of money that you spend as compared to the amount of money that other people spend, which is just very tiny? Is that very likely to affect the market price? To change the price at which everybody else is buying or selling? No. The price will remain virtually unchanging. The market price will remain unchanging. So what does that mean? That means reducing your price, and you would be reducing your revenue per unit sold without forcing other people to do the same. So everybody else can just ignore you and keep selling the old higher prices, and you would be losing revenue per unit for every unit that you sell. You would be losing money. You may increase marginally the number of units that you sell, but not very large, because your size is so small. So eventually the only thing that you will succeed in doing is actually to reduce your revenue by reducing the price. So revenue equals price times quantity. Your quantity will remain virtually unchanged or slightly increased, but your revenue will decline. More you produce and sell, lower price per unit will be leading to lower revenue vis-a-vis your competitors. You will be out of business very quickly. So you cannot either increase or decrease price. You have to keep the price to whatever the market conditions demand. Now, this is an individual curve facing demand curve facing an individual firm, and price is given. But then, how on earth is this price determined? Can you tell me that? Can you speculate for a moment about how this parametric price, it's called sometimes parametric price, which means that you just plug it into your system as a parameter. It is a given parameter, $7.6 per unit. You just take it as a given, as an individual firm. You don't worry very much about how when it is coming from. What is the source of this price? How is this price determined? Let's say that this is a wheat market. Very often, wheat market is considered to be close to perfectly competitive because it's a homogeneous product, the same product, a large number of sellers. It's been traded on the stock market, low information barriers, and so on and so forth. So how the price of wheat is determined? Just as the price of any other commodity or good or service, supply and demand. This is the same price. This is one and the same price. It is determined here, and it is used here as a parameter by individual firms. So what determines demand and supply curves for wheat? You're going to tell me a few things about how are they determined? Preferences. Very well. How the preferences determine the demand curve for wheat? Is it in isolation from other goods and services? Or not in isolation from other goods and services? It's always relative scarcity preferences vis-a-vis other goods. So that's the market for wheat is market for everything. Demand can go left or right, depending on the preferences for wheat vis-a-vis preferences for other goods. If people want less wheat as compared to other goods, the demand curve will shift to the left. The supply is fixed, then the price will go down. If the demand increases, if everybody adopts, joke sometimes, if everybody adopts the Eastern European way, which means that you eat bread with everything, including potato, then the demand curve will shift. If all Northern Cottons become overnight a bunch of crazy Eastern European bread eaters, the demand curve for wheat will increase. Will move to the right. What about supply? Supply changes as a function of what? Costs of production, as a function of meteorology, weather. So if you have a good harvest, your supply curve of wheat will shift to the right. If you have a bad harvest, it's going to move to the left. You find a better technological way to produce wheat, the supply curve shifts to the right, and so on. This is the basic supply and demand analysis, and the price fluctuates all the time, depending on the conditions in the wheat market, in all other markets. Okay, so let's Are there any questions thus far? So always distinguish this is the demand and supply in the wheat market as a total. Always have to distinguish between the demand curve in the entire market and the demand curve that an individual firm is facing. So see, the demand for wheat is not necessarily very elastic or inelastic. We assume here that it's like a unit elastic, which means that other things that compete with wheat for consumer dollars are by and large create this downward sloping demand curve. It's not horizontal. It could be even like this. But wheat is very important, and demand for wheat is inelastic. So the shapes of the demand curve for the whole market depend on the substitutability of that good and other goods. Whereas the shape of this demand curve depends on the characteristics of the market, of that particular market. Exactly. This is general equilibrium, the entire economy here. This is partial equilibrium, just one market. Always bear that in mind. Okay. This is individual firm, this is the whole market. Some interesting points to make about this model here. This is the price. What would be the revenue of this firm? Could be first total revenue. What is total revenue? The price is always the same, $10. Let's say $10 per bushel forever. It doesn't change. However many units that you produce as a firm, you're always going to charge, and you can charge only one price, only $10. If it changes here, if it drops on the market to $9, you can charge $9 for all units. So now what your total revenue will be? You're a firm, let's say you produce 8 units of wheat. This is quantity, 8 units. What is your total revenue per period of time, per year, whatever? This rectangle. Price per unit times number of units. So total revenue would be $80. Number of units, price. That's one category, total revenue. How about average revenue? What is that? Simple, probably the first thing that pops up in your mind. You have total revenue, what would be the average revenue? Total revenue divided by what? No. I'm 46 old, you are 20 years old, you are 20 years old. What is our average age? Sum them up, divide by 3. So here the same thing. The average revenue is the total revenue divided by the number of units. So that would be 80 divided by 8, $10. Average revenue per unit is $10. Okay? Come on, people, it's a concept of average in mathematics. And the final concept is the marginal revenue. Marginal. So what is marginal? Can anyone now earn good participation grade on this? Can you tell me what is the marginal revenue that this competitive firm faces? Use the analogy with marginal utility and you will understand what I have in mind. What is marginal utility? Just apply the concept to marginal revenue. What is marginal utility? Come on. Marginal utility. Marginal revenue.
The price you forgo for not choosing, the price you forgo
That's opportunity cost. Something that you forego for not choosing.
The value of each additional unit.
The value of something additional, utility of one additional unit. Okay, that's marginal utility. What then the marginal revenue would be? The revenue that you get by selling one more unit. So marginal revenue is the revenue that you get by producing and selling one more unit. What is the marginal revenue for this firm? But, yeah, what is when you start from 0 to 1? What is the revenue that you get by increasing your production from 0 to 1? 10. What is the revenue when you go from 1 to 2? 10, and so on down the line. So what is marginal revenue? Is always $10. $10. So then you can say that the price in this perfectly competitive market, there is one law that says that price equals average revenue equals marginal revenue. This is very important. One more thing that is important to bear in mind, that we know that in economics, everything is about marginal qualities. We make decisions not based about some abstract calculations about totals and averages. We made our decisions based on our calculation, whether I will be better off or worse off if I do one more unit of this activity, or if I produce one more unit of that good, or if I consume one more unit of coffee or food or so on. So marginal values are always determining our decisions about everything. So now marginal revenue is one key concept that is used in training perfectly competitive market. Now I'm going to introduce another concept that at this point I will not be able to explain you fully, and I promise that I will do that when we talk about the prices of the productive factors a few weeks from now. But for now, I'm just going to dogmatically assert to you that this curve, then demand curve, could be called the marginal revenue curve, because it shows the series of marginal revenues that you earn by selling in a perfectly competitive market. So demand curve is the same. Demand curve equals marginal revenue curve. Okay. And its value is the market price because it's completely horizontal and fixed, unchanging. Now, you can guess what will be the equilibrium at which a perfectly competitive firm will be selling. It will be when its marginal revenue corresponds to its marginal costs. So what are marginal costs? Those are the costs of producing one additional unit. Marginal cost. That's the cost of producing one more unit. And now the dogmatic part here goes like this. This is the marginal cost curve. It looks something like this. Why it looks something like this? Why it starts going downward first and then shuts up upward. We'll postpone the discussion for that. I will just tell you that this upward sloping part of the curve is relevant for us, and that the easiest way of thinking about the marginal cost curve is that that's a supply curve for an individual firm. It tells you at every given price how many units a firm will be producing. Okay? At price $3, 5 units. Price $10, 8 units. At price $12, the firm can produce theoretically 9 or 10 units. So the easiest way, that's a marginal cost curve, is a supply curve that tells, as you increase the price, how many additional units firm in theory can produce. Okay. So now, how many units the firm will produce in reality will depend on the demand of the product or on the price. In our particular case, marginal cost equals marginal revenue, or supply equals demand. At this point, where a firm produces 8 units at the price of $10. So the market equilibrium of a perfectly competitive firm is determined as equality between marginal revenue and marginal cost, or price and marginal cost, which is the same thing. So what does that mean further? That means that since you cannot do anything about prices, we've seen already that if you try to either increase or decrease price, you're toast. The only way the perfectly competitive firm can compete against its opposition is by increasing or decreasing the volume of production, the number of units it produces. What can we say about that? It's very simple. Let's assume for a moment that this firm, its equilibrium quantity of production is 8 units. That's how much this firm should be producing to maximize its revenue. Let's say that the firm produces 6 units instead. So we say then that the marginal cost is smaller than its marginal revenue. It produces 6 units. Here is the quantity on the marginal cost. When you project here, your cost that you pay is lower than $10. So marginal cost is marginal revenue. What the firm will do in order to maximize its profit or revenue? What is the profit maximizing strategy here?
To make more?
Yeah, to make more, to increase production. Until which point?
Never, just keep going.
Keep going?
Yes.
Forever. 20 units. What if you produce 20 units? Here on your marginal cost. Can you do it profitably?
No.
If price is 10? Why? Because your cost then will be 20 or 25. You will have to sell at 25 in order to cover your costs. You see, the market price is 10. So you cannot produce 20 or 25. You can produce only 8. You can produce only up to the point where producing one additional unit will require you to charge more than the market price. Then you will be losing money. You have to charge 11 and the market price is 10. So then you increase production until marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. So the profit maximizing strategy for a situation when marginal cost is lower than marginal revenue is to increase production until you equalize them. For different firms, this will be different. If your supply curve was something like this, what can you tell me about this firm number 2 as compared to firm number 1? About its productive efficiency, efficiency of its workers, technology, and so on. They're better. They can produce at the same price, they can profitably produce and sell more. 11 units on hand. So depending on where your cost curve is, which then depends on how good you are, how productive you are, you can produce more or less. But in both cases, this firm cannot increase it to 25 either. Because what if they increase quantity to 15 here? They will be also in the position to charge much higher price than they can get on the market. So that's a strategy. Increase production if your marginal cost is lower than marginal revenue. And vice versa, you can now see if your marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. If your marginal cost is greater than your marginal revenue, what do you do then? As quickly as possible, reduce production. If your marginal cost is 12, you produce the 90 unit and the marginal cost is 12, and you can charge only 10 on the market. Reduce. You would have been better off without having produced that unit. So you reduce production to eliminate losses. So then you reduce production until which point? Until you reach equality, roughly. So that's the process of equilibration of this market. you react to changes in prices. So how competition functions, actually this market, big market with the downward sloping demand curve changes prices all the time, and the firms are then adjusting. Imagine that the market price went down to $8, then all the firms across the board would be reducing their production. This number one would go from 8 to, let's say, 7, new equilibrium, and the firm number 2 would go from 11 to, let's say, 10 or 9. So see how adjustment happens. Consumers say we want less wheat than before, for whatever reason. We are less crazy about bread. We want to buy more of something else. How firms react to that? They say, very well, we're going to produce less for you. And vice versa. The market price goes up for whatever reason. Demand increased, supply decreased, whatever. Firms say, oh, very well, I'm going to produce 1 more unit for you. I'm going to produce 2 more units for you. So see, it's a very simple demonstration at one level how, and now I'm coming to my initial promise to tell you why people use this model. It's a very simple demonstration of the fact that you don't need a central commissar or central planning body in order to coordinate activities of consumers and producers. Market system is very efficient, this invisible hand of the market. Whenever something happens with the demand and price for one good, producers react to that very quickly by increasing or decreasing the level of production to satisfy the change in demand. The price goes up because consumers want less wheat and more corn, for example. Wheat producers react to that and reduce production of wheat, freeing up workers and capital and resources to be invested in other goods that are more currently needed. And vice versa, the price goes up. Other things reduce, other industries reduce their production capital and labor shift here, and firms have more resources to invest and produce more goods and services to satisfy higher demand. See, it shows how in this extremely simple situation, you don't need central planning in order to determine who is going to produce what. Just allow people, millions of unconnected people, to follow their profit maximizing motives. They're going to regulate the economy in a way that benefits the final consumer eventually, that satisfies the final consumer demand. So that's the motivation for this very simple model, just to illustrate these basic facts. Sometimes this model is called perfect decentralization model. It says that even this extremely decentralized market setting can create efficient economic outcomes. Okay, are there any final questions about this? Is this reasonably clear? If there are some problems, please write me or come to see me during office hours. We'll continue on Friday and have a nice, I was going to say break, not break, the day of service. Yeah.